Welcome back to Mecha March Madness. Today, it's time we talk about what may be the original Mecha, or one of them anyway. It's complicated. After conquering the Emerald Hills, Mystic Caves, oils of ocean, zipping through the skies and through the stars, Sonic the Hedgehog 2 ends its grand adventure in a surprisingly short zone made up of only 2 rooms, and only one single challenge between you and your final fight with Robotnik. But as you start the level in a cramped shaft filled with eerie music, you exit out and a robot descends from above, one with a very familiar look. And soon Sonic stands across the room to see himself. This was, to many young Sonic fans in the 90s, their very first experience with a robot Sonic duplicate. This is Mecha Sonic, or Mecha Sonic Mark I nowadays, and sometimes Silver Sonic, and Robo Sonic one time. Again, it's complicated, and it doesn't stop at the name, because today we're not only going to talk about this particular robot, we also need to talk about the time 3 different dev teams all made 3 different Sonic robots around the same time without telling each other about it. But hey, before we get into it proper, we gotta talk about something that's on every Sonic fan's mind: grooming. This video is sponsored by Manscaped. I've worked with them a few months ago, and I've been very impressed with their products ever since. And I've been impressed with their advertising. They even made a Sonic Adventure 2 reference recently on Twitter. Really putting Shadow's shaving habits on blast, aren't you, Manscaped? Well, they do more than just shave your spin balls. They also work wonders on your face. I know my avatar doesn't show it. I really need to update it. That thing's like 7 years old now. But nowadays, I sport a beard. And not only does that need maintenance, it needs its own special care, considering that hair on your face is different from the hair on your head. And Manscaped has that covered with their new Beard Hedger Pro Kit. They sent one over to me, and I'm extremely impressed with this. They've thought of everything. See, with most other face shaving kits, you have to hassle with different add-on guards if you want to get the right length, meaning you gotta swap out potentially multiple times every single trim if you want to shape your beard just the way you like. I had a drawer full of this garbage. The Beard Hedger throws all of that out the window by using a rotary wheel that allows for 20 different lengths on one single guard. On top of that, it's cordless and waterproof, meaning you can just shave in the shower if you want, don't have to make a mess of your sink, and has a titanium coated T-blade that is both tough on hair but smooth on skin, so you won't have to worry about inconsistent lengths while you shave. And on top of that, the kit also includes beard shampoo and conditioner, beard oil, and beard balm, because remember, beard hair is different from regular hair and requires different care. And all of this stuff has been tested by dermatologists, making sure to keep your facial hair and skin nice and healthy while you trim, clean, and shape your beard just the way you like. And to top it all off, that even comes with 3 free gifts: a beard comb, brush, and scissors. Told you this thing comes with everything you need. I'm aware not everyone here watching has a beard to fuss with, but trust me, if you got someone in your life with serious facial hair, this is the perfect gift. So if you'd like to grab one for yourself or someone else, you can use the offer code Apologist at manscaped.com, and that will get you 20% off your order and free shipping. Links in the description. Thank you again to Manscaped for the sponsorship and keeping me pretty. Let's get the video started. I still remember the very first time I came across this bot. I didn't own a Genesis right away. Sonic CD was already a thing, and in turn, Metal Sonic was already a thing. They had nailed that design so brilliantly, so early, I didn't even think of the possibility of there being another Sonic bot waiting out there somewhere. But to my surprise, after finally building the skill and finding the time to play through Sonic 2, I finally came face to face with this chunky pile of scrap. Immediately, yeah, this robot was far less impressive design-wise compared to the slick, sinister, iconic look of Metal Sonic. This one is a drab gray with only a bit of color found in the fiery red, orange shoes and glowing eyes, or as I would later learn, a single eye. Which, yeah, I was never really a big fan after learning that. Looks a bit weird. But yeah, at first glance, this is just a Sonic robot. Nothing really special in this design. But don't get me wrong, I was still quite excited to see a Robo double. But that's all it was to me. It's just a Sonic with bolted metal all over the place. But years later, after we finally saw some concept art, I gotta admit my opinion did change a bit. Because as it turns out, like many other things in Sonic 2, this robot is yet another reference to another iconic franchise. We have Star Wars with a Death Egg, Dragon Ball with Super Sonic, and here we have a nod to Mecha Godzilla. And with that, yeah, my stubborn American brain finally admitted that Mecha Sonic is probably the best name for this particular robot. That was a name that was thrown around here and the States in all kinds of confusing places, thanks Archie, but the original intention of the robot was a clear reference to the Robo Kaiju, clearly seen in the production art of the bot itself. If the bolted metal wasn't a clear enough indication, it also has MS insignias similar to the MG on Showa Mechagodzilla, at least in this specific picture. And this is only further doubled down on thanks to Mecha's cameo in Sonic Adventure. And yeah, fun little update there. If you guys recall, during last year's marathon, my buddy Chowmix and I rambled on and on, wondering what the point of this mysterious robot was, only to have eagle-eyed Godzilla fans immediately point out that the unique textures on this version of Mecha Sonic matched up exactly with Showa-era Mechagodzilla. So yeah, obviously, this was supposed to be Mecha Sonic. And to land the final nail in the coffin of that mystery, Ian Flynn also somewhat recently confirmed on his show, The Bumblecast, that this is indeed Mecha Sonic. Version 3, to be more exact. Now, that could be updated lore. They have been shuffling that around for the last year or so, but this blatant Mechagodzilla skin still leads me to believe that the Adventure Bot was originally meant to just be the OG Sonic 2 version, even if the design was a little different. The intent remains the same. It's a reference to Mechagodzilla. I know I've said different in the past, and yeah, it is still unique on its own considering the design, and Sega is now acknowledging all of these as different robots, which is awesome, but I have a sneaking suspicion that this was only ever meant to represent the Sonic 2 robot. But that's just fun speculation. Whatever the case is, this is now Mecha Sonic 3 going forward. But let's get back to the one from Sonic 2. You'd think knowing that this was yet another reference to other bits of popular culture would make me less interested in this design. But honestly, I kind of think it makes it a bit more charming, especially looking at how hard they went with the detail in this one image. This is really good stuff. And hey, in a way, it does acknowledge the American Mohawk Sonic design. I kind of wonder if that was an intentional jab back in the day when they built this boss fight. Oh well. Either way, I now have an action figure of the Mecha Mohawk, and that is pretty rad. I like that the Mohawk at least exists in some form all these years later. And all of that aside, this Mecha Sonic still stands out by being larger and far more intimidating compared to Metal. It takes the very same moveset of Sonic and uses it against you, except this guy can put a lot more power behind these moves, making it a very harrowing fight for your first time through. As the battle begins, Mecha Sonic stands almost stationary, except for his hairdo. A loud buzz emanates from the quills as they move like a chainsaw up and down the back of the bot. And while this hulking slab of iron seems far too clunky to match the speed of Sonic, those jets do far more than let it slowly fall from the sky. It can also shoot the robot from one side of the room to the other. But worse than that, this robot can also, amazingly, spin dash, forming up into a large iron ball, with those serrated quills still out to let the player know that running into this thing probably isn't a smart idea. Sonic's spin dash cannot match this robot's, but you can, obviously, dodge out of the way easy enough, at least at first, because as the fight drags on, the robot will switch up its pattern. Not only does it spin dash across the room, but it can also jump mid-spin, and even later, frustratingly, even launch spikes. Now, while none of this seems like a great deal to manage, if this is your first time up against Mecha, you're going to notice just how heavily you relied on help that is no longer here. You can't just blindly attack, and this robot is already far more demanding in terms of memorization compared to most every other boss fight leading up to this point. And worse than that, you have to take this robot down by yourself. There's no Tails here to act as a damage sponge and land all the hits, and even if you collected all of the Chaos Emeralds, you don't have enough rings to bring out your super form. In fact, you have absolutely no rings going into this fight. So many kids back in the day probably thought that they were the most clever little things while they were figuring out this game, relying on an immortal CPU sidekick to sort out some nastier problems, or hiding in particular portions of the map to avoid damage in some boss fights, speaking specifically of Oil Ocean here. But outside of just flat out cheating with passcodes, the game has stripped any handicap you might have been relying on up to this point, and it places a metal mirror in front of you, telling you that your skill, and your skill alone, needs to match and defeat a more powerful version of yourself. This bot goes down in 8 carefully placed hits, but Mecha only needs to land one on you, and he doesn't need to be careful about it. If you can't take down Eggman's duplicate of the Hedgehog, what chance do you have against the Doctor himself when he comes out swinging in a robot that represents the most dangerous version of himself? Of course, if you are a veteran of the game, you do eventually get over the intimidation factor, and you'll find yourself as confident as Sonic and take this robot out with no problem. And I kinda love how the Fleetway comic represented just that. Yeah, we're gonna talk about the comics quickly, sorry. See, in Fleetway, Mecha is just a sad mess of a robot, and that's because, in this story, Sonic has already been here. This was still really early on in the comic run. Sonic 2 was already out, and this was long before Sonic 3. So here in this canon, the Death Egg is still floating around in space, abandoned, and Mecha was already thrashed by Sonic the first time around. I don't know if Sonic left it functional or if the robot rebuilt itself, but I kinda love the idea of an abandoned Death Egg floating around in the upper atmosphere somewhere. I've only ever seen the Fleetway version of Mecha in passing, and it was just treated as an ugly joke. But to be fair, that's how Sonic treats it in the story itself. But after reading it, I gotta admit, this is a really cool concept, and I almost feel bad for the robot. And yeah, Mecha Sonic also did briefly appear in the Sonic manga. We've gotta read through that sometime. It's incredibly weird and fun, and in its own way, not that dissimilar from early Archie. And speaking of, Mecha Sonic appeared here as well, going by the name of Silver Sonic. And yeah, this is where all of the confusing naming nonsense began. So I guess welcome to another edition of What's in a Name. See, here in America, we never got the name of the robot in the manual, but the 8-bit version of the game did, and it was known as Silver Sonic. Because of that, I think plenty of fans just went on to assume that the name of the Genesis version was Silver Sonic as well. I had heard that name somewhere before it ever appeared in Archie, but eventually it did appear in Archie, and it did sport the name Silver Sonic. So, as a kid, I just assumed that was always its name. What made this version of the robot interesting to me as a kid was, well, we already had Metal Sonic in the canon, and we also had Mecha Sonic, at least a Mecha Sonic that more resembled Mark II, meaning in this universe, the Sonic 2 robot was designed after Metal Sonic and Mecha Mark II. Is this making any kind of sense? I'm sorry, I know it's confusing, it's Archie, that's just kind of how it goes. But I gotta admit, I was very happy to see this design. I wasn't expecting it when I was first reading this back in the day. Silver Sonic does at least justify the silver name with its shiny sheen on the body as opposed to that dirty gray we get in the core game. And weirdly enough, in the classic games, Mecha Mark II is obviously an upgrade from Sonic 2's version of Mecha Sonic. But here in Archie, Silver Sonic was based off the data Robotnik gathered from Sonic when he was roboticized into Mecha Sonic, and then just used that data, put it into this robot, and beefed it up. And you can even see some of the design elements from Archie Mecha Sonic in the body of Silver Sonic. So that technically means that Silver Sonic is an upgraded version of Mecha Sonic. So yeah, I guess these two designs are still connected, just in reverse. Again, very confusing, but kinda cool. We're gonna save the story of the Death Egg saga for Archie Sonic's speed reading, because trust me, it's a fun, silly time. But this wasn't the last place we would see Silver Sonic, as it would show up later in a second design, one we've already covered on the show. So we're gonna skip that for now. But it did come around for a third time, and it would go back to the hulking Sonic 2 roots. And I gotta tell you, I absolutely love this design. You can see some elements of Silver Sonic 2 here, mostly in the chest plate and I guess in some of the proportions, but it's mostly a callback to the original design we found from Sonic 2. Sonic himself even references that first fight here, and I just love how sharp and scary this dude looks. It really feels like Ian and Tracy had a grand old time sprucing this boy up, and I think they must have loved it themselves because they reused this particular robot at least a couple more times. But yeah, again, I'm sorry, we're not going to spoil any stories just yet. I just want to make quick reference to it. You guys need to trust me on this. I know it's easy to bag on early Archie Sonic, but man, things got wild when Silver Sonic 3 showed up. It teams up with Metal Sonic to fight Sonic, and oh, it's so good, guys. It's so damn good. But hey, with all the rebooting and this or that and the other, Silver Sonic would show up just one more time, and this time it looked almost identical to the version we saw from the game itself, Cyclops Eye and all. But still, interestingly enough, still called Silver Sonic, as I would find out by reading the editorial comment in the back of the book. I gotta admit, I still prefer Silver Sonic 3, but hey, even if it's not my absolute favorite robot Sonic design, I always loved seeing this guy, and I'm glad he got to show up at least one more time before the tragic cancellation of this legendary series. But in this issue, Sonic does bring up something that did confuse me quite a few times as a kid. See, at least in the rebooted Archie lore, Sonic 2 takes place before Sonic CD, and they treat Silver Sonic as the prototype to what would eventually become Metal Sonic. But nowadays, in terms of the fiction, Sonic Origins tells us that Sonic CD takes place between Sonic 1 and 2. And in terms of the overall evolution of classic Sonic gameplay, that does make sense to me. But in terms of narrative, it gets a little confusing, largely thanks to Metal Sonic. According to this new retconned lore, Metal Sonic was created before any of the Mecha line. Now, you could explain that away easily enough with a bit of mental gymnastics. These are ultimately robots, and truth be told, the more the merrier. There's a reason I'm doing this marathon. But it does still feel somewhat needlessly complicated, especially back when these games originally released. And whatever they ended up deciding to do with these robots after the fact, I was still curious to learn about the original intentions of their creators. See, back in the 90s, Sonic 2 dropped before Sonic CD, so again, it only made sense that Mecha Sonic was just a prototype to Metal, kind of like Iron Man's shoddily put together Mark I design that he built in a cave with a box of scraps, versus the sleek and sexy Mark III, a rudimentary, awkward first attempt to emulate the power of the hedgehog that always manages to thwart the angry Egg Boy. It's an iron-plated Sonic. It looks like a lifeless machine, and it doesn't make any sense why Eggman would make this clunky thing after designing Metal Sonic, the one robot he consistently uses. I mean, Metal immediately became a mainstay of the series. They slapped that bot all over everything promoting Sonic CD, and the dude even got a major role in an OVA. But later on in life, I learned that Sonic CD was developed at the same time as Sonic 2, and that just made things a little more confusing. Why on earth would Sega make two entirely different designs of a Sonic robot? Three designs, if you think about it. Remember, 8-bit Sonic 2 was also released around the same time as the Genesis game, and that Mecha Sonic is completely different in design and battle strategy compared to the other two robots. When you consider all of the stories of how poor the communication was between the different branches of Sega back in the 90s, and just how loosey-goosey the rules could be, is it at all possible that the teams behind Sonic CD, Sonic 2 Genesis, and Sonic 8-bit all came to the same idea of making a robot copy of Sonic without knowing the other teams were working on it, and ended up producing wildly different designs? Well, yeah, as it turns out, that's exactly what happened. See, I'm far from the first person to ask that particular question. I stumbled across this response from Naoto Oishima, the original designer of Sonic and the director of Sonic CD, among many other things he's done in his illustrious career. It reads, quote, "Sonic 2 and Sonic CD have time series only for certain characters. Sonic 2's Mecha Sonic, Sonic CD Metal Sonic. The evolution version of Mecha Sonic is Metal Sonic." Which, yeah, obviously the English broke a bit through a translator, but I understood this to mean that he was explaining who was who between the two different bots, and saying now, retroactively, Metal Sonic is the final evolution of Mecha Sonic. But I only ever saw this response in image form, and I didn't know the source. So I thought I needed to dig a little deeper, and I couldn't think of anyone else better to reach out to than my friend Snick, who has done some very extensive deep dives and research into the development of the original games. And he confirmed, yeah, this response is legit. And Snick went on to actually source the original logs this response came from. On top of that, he even showed me Twitter responses from Mazen, who was on Sega CD staff, as well as Yasushi Yamaguchi, who's often credited as Judy Toyota. Both corroborated the lack of communication between the two dev teams. And I'll just go ahead and read some of these translated tweets here. Snick actually went to the trouble of taking them through the DeepL translator because it's a little more accurate than Twitter's. According to Judy Toyota, "I have received a few questions about the meaning of prototype anti-Sonic unit in the Mecha Sonic illustration I posted yesterday. And while Eggman's other mechanics were basically created for his own ambitions, Mecha Sonic is the first combat unit created solely to counter Sonic." Because yeah, as you can see here in some of this concept art, some of these notes translate to prototype anti-Sonic unit, which was lovingly referenced in that final Silver Sonic fight in Archie. And Mason wrote back in 2020, "Sonic Sonic 2 is now available on the Switch. The original was developed at a different location at the same time as Sonic CD, but since we were separated in the US and here, and there was no internet at the time, I was very excited every time a new ROM arrived. Hey, it's Mecha Sonic, you're just like ours, I thought, and further went on to say about timeline shenanigans. Quote, the timeline between Sonic 2 and CD is also ambiguous, and it seems that Mr. Yamaguchi, the designer, assumed that CD was between 1 and 2, but there is a contradiction in that Metal Sonic is more complete and more powerful as a gadget than Mecha Sonic in 2. So yeah, even back in the day, the timeline could shift depending on what team was working on what game. And interestingly, it seems that Naoto Oishima himself felt that Sonic CD took place between Sonic 2 and Sonic 3. And no matter how else you cut it, they did design a brand new Mecha Sonic for Sonic and Knuckles well after they designed the ever iconic Metal Sonic. But even there, as we found out from Sonic Origins, it looks like they had held on to the original Mecha Sonic design pretty far into development, because the Super Mecha Sonic we see in the concept art is not the one we see in Sonic and Knuckles. It's clearly far closer in design with the Sonic 2 version. And I like that his little serrated blade quills go spiking up like a Super Saiyan. That's adorable. I'm throwing around a lot of mechas and metals and silvers and Sonics and everything. I hope all of this makes any kind of sense. The point is, yeah, they were figuring out as they were going along. And from what I can gather, the 8-bit Sonic 2 team had barely any communication with the Genesis team. So I don't know if any of them told them to use a Mecha Sonic or not, but clearly they didn't share a lot of notes because that robot looks entirely different and shares a very different role. I mean, it's still a boss, but it's a robot master. You get it. Even within Sonic Team, it looks like the timeline even back then was a bit of a mess. I still think plot-wise it makes a lot more sense to have Sonic 1, 2, 3, and Knuckles take place before Sonic CD, just for the sake of the Emeralds and the Death Egg and obviously the Mecha Sonics versus Metal Sonic. I really do think Origins placed the games the way it did for the sake of gameplay evolution over the narrative. And honestly, gun to my head, I probably would have made that call as well. Despite whatever hiccups Origins has, probably the best way to show the evolution of classic Sonic, which does need to take priority over different Sonic robots. Yeah, I think it's pretty clear that Metal Sonic is far superior in design compared to this original Mecha Sonic, but you know what? I love that they're all here, and I love that they are still here in some form or another. All of these mechas have shown up through the years, and they're showing up more and more often. This robot specifically showed up in that weird flash animation they tried to call a game mode in Mario and Sonic at the Olympic Games 2020, and they added a little bit more in the name confusion with the name Robo Sonic in LEGO Dimensions. And believe it or not, that's not the only time a Robo Sonic was called Robo Sonic. There's more than one, but we've had enough tangents for today. It's been in other spots here and there, but the point is, even though Metal Sonic gets all the love, this tin can still shows up in a surprising amount of content, and I am here for it. It even got itself an action figure in the recent Jax line, and a smaller version of that same figure is coming out pretty soon. And you know what? This silly little toy is actually a big deal because it was the first time here in the States they finally confirmed and settled on the name Mecha Sonic. Not Silver, not Robo, Mecha. Do I still love those other names? Absolutely. I did fight against the name of Mecha for a very long time. As far as I'm concerned, that name really belonged to the one from SNK, but hey, it's in the same line. And I love that this is a nod to Mecha Godzilla. I have to respect that. And whatever else about the name, again, I'm just happy it's around. I whine and gripe about Sega disregarding so many of its legacy characters and ideas and concepts that they own and just don't use, but I gotta admit, I think this original Mecha Sonic is getting just the right amount of love. And that is not the only mecha that is finally getting its time to shine, but that is for another video. And this is where we're gonna call it for today, guys. Thank you so much for hanging out with me for another fun time during Mecha March Madness. I didn't expect this script to veer off the way it did, but I gotta admit, it was a lot of fun picking apart what the original intention of the original developers were, and I do understand why, after all of this mess that was placed out all over the place back in the 90s, they're trying to sort that out. Whether or not I agree with the placement of games in a timeline, I'm glad that they're actually going to the trouble of trying to make any kind of sense out of it. But yeah, gotta go. Been recording for quite a while now. But I want to thank you all for hanging out with me today, and an extra special thank you to all the patrons who support the channel. Guys, thank you so much. And I do, of course, have to give an extra special shout out to these fine folks here: Kyle Winter, Cirrus the Skeptic, Joseph Duncan Sonic 2 Blue, John, Josh Strider, Macy Monroe Madness, Faizan Razul, Hatsworth, Tiny Jericho, Ginger Bob, Jack of All Spades, Tristan Trapp, Meekers, Dun Dun, Quote Resident Fanboy, Miles the Prower, Jeremy Singer, Mr. Boo J, Sam Webster, Dwight Graham, Fishflop, Lucas Lipker, The Bad Pal, Jonathan Dobbs, Clover Chats, Haley, Mr. Dr. SP, Doctorate Pending, Cecil the Galade, The Dark Neon, Stefan Plakanica, 3 Monic, Graham J. Hall, Lenny X, Wayne is Boss, Jamie Chevalier, Lederick, sleep in heavenly peace as we 20 cover you in the softest blankets. Oh, that does sound nice. I am so tired. Jimmy Duke STR, the Lumberjack. Can he hear me? Please, if you can hear me, you're in a coma and the doctor's about to pull the plug and you have to give me a sign you're still in. You guys are so dark with these. Oh my god. Mute, Trash Baphomet, Autumn from Twitter.com, SSG Infinite Sonic. That Pyromane has decided to start spreading positive Sonic Heroes propaganda cause nostalgia and attachment. Yeah, I get it. Jin Sayotame, Botan, I'm not reading that. Enerjack 5, Grayson Conager, Spades the Nocturne, Ken K, Ven 101, Paxton Bisbeast, and Darren 7, Punby. 3 Rule 4, Twilord, Number 1 Boss Baby Fan, Paisley, Eric Delgado, Cody Gracious, Kodinsky, Jamo Art, PK Durbar, Crimson Rose, Give Up Your Children, Separate, Sonic PAJ, Moonicent, Gaga Ga 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 Gao Guy Gar Ga 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 Ga. Oh boy. You don't have much time. Move your hand, wiggle your big toe. The American healthcare system is a cesspool of villainy. Work with me. I mean, I guess that's better than trying to get me to shout out other brand names that aren't sponsoring said videos. Roxas the Cat, Godzilla, Makuta of Salt, Gleam the Anomaly, Alexander Watson, Calais Presley, Neil Gampa, Conan Kudo, Sharif Pai, Aeon 3 Valafor, Tenric Terror, The Lex, the most powerful ship in the 2 universes, Native Nerd 27, Kaido Prower. Oh, you gave me a note about that. Oh, did I read that right? Oh, I'm gonna have to check that for next time. Matt the Hedgehog, wow, Nick, way to dox me last episode. I'm sorry, dude. Swift Cannon, Spearmint. What did I just read? Seriously, I'm looking right at it and I still have no clue. You guys just get me to read anything. This is terrible. You're gonna get me in trouble. Does any other YouTuber have this much fun reading out Patreon shoutouts at the end of videos? You guys are wonderful. Thank you again so much for your support, and I'll catch you all later. Toot toot, Mecha Sonic Warriors.